Pesach's Gittin Daf Yud Vez discusses a sugya not directly related to Gittin. That is the sugya of, is a owner, as a master of an eved, allowed to refuse to feed the eved, or does he have to feed him? This is a question. Some machlokas elsewhere in Shas. The Gemara is going to try to prove it first from our most recent Mishnah, and then bring a number of other proofs about the subject. So again, what's the question? If a master owns an eved, so is he allowed to tell the Eved, I'm not going to feed you, you have to go collect for your own funds? Obviously he doesn't have to starve, but it's up to you to support yourself. And I still get to keep your work, meaning the Eved is really stuck here. He has to work for the master. He can't work for himself. Any work that he does, the profits and the money he earns go to the master. And the master doesn't have to feed him. If he wants to eat, he has to go collect for his own funds. So is the master allowed to say that to him, or does the master have to say either, or is the master obligated to either feed him or let him keep his own earnings so that he could feed himself off that? So the Gemara says, if you look at our last Mishnah, the Chachamim say a difference between an Eved and Isha. They say that a master is obligated to, that a husband is obligated to support his wife, but a master is not obligated to support his Eved. And it's a nafkamina as far as we were discussing there as to whether or not he could retract if once he sends him a get shechar. But the Chachamim do say that difference between the two. So the Gemara is going to want to know what is the case, and whatever we're going to explain the case, we're going to have to figure out why there's a difference between the two. So the Gemara first says, what you clearly see over here is that the master could pull out. He could say, I don't want to feed the Eved, which proves that he doesn't have to feed the Eved. He could go tell the Eved to support yourself, even though he's collecting the work. So the Gemara says, no, maybe we're talking about over here, where he says, use your work to feed yourself. How do you know that he could say, I'm not feeding you, but I'm taking your work? Maybe saying, I'm not feeding you, keep your money for your work, which everybody agrees you're allowed to do. So the Gemara says, because then what would be the difference between the Eved and the Isha? A husband is allowed to say to his wife, at least according to some opinions, keep your own profits from your own work and feed yourself, and I'm not going to feed you any longer. If that's what he's saying to the Eved, he could say that to the wife as well. So what do we mean when we say that he could say to the Eved, I'm not feeding you, but he can't say it to the wife? So the Gemara says, because we're referring to here where the work is not enough to fully support him, and he could still say, keep your own work and feed yourself, even though it's not enough. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, same thing by Eved. The Gemara says, no, there's a big difference. A woman, her husband could say, support yourself, and if the money's not enough, your problem. Man, an owner, is not going to hold on to an Eved who doesn't earn enough money to support himself. If his earnings don't equal what it costs to feed him, he's going to send them away. There's no way he's going to hold on to them. So there can't be such a mitzvah. And therefore, when we're talking about the Eved, we have to be referring to where the Eved earns enough money to feed himself. And when we're talking about the Isha, she does not earn enough money to feed herself. And therefore, he can't say that to the woman, but he could say that to the Eved. And now the Gemara goes on to a different case, but we'll have a very similar exchange. Here we have a brayso that says that if an Eved kills someone by mistake and he gets sent to a miklat, the master no longer has to support him. Not only that, but he could keep the ma'aseh yadayim. So you see clearly, he could say, I'm not supporting you, but I'm keeping your work. The Gemara says again, it could be referring to where he said that you could keep your work and feed yourself from it. The Gemara says, then what do we mean when we say that he gets to keep his work? What do we mean when we say that the master gets to keep the work? The Gemara says that's talking about if he earns more money than it takes to feed him, the extra money the master could keep. That is, the master says as follows, I'm not feeding you. Therefore, you get the right to keep your own money, to keep your own earnings in order to be able to feed yourself. Anything extra that you earn above what it costs to eat, that you have to give me. And that is the halacha. So the Gemara says, why then would there be a chiddush in that? Why would I think that he wouldn't have to give it to him? He only should keep what he needs to eat. The chiddush would be is that maybe we would say to him, or he could say, let me keep more than what I need to earn just in case soon I won't have a job. I'm not always going to have a job, so let me save up a little bit so that I can support myself. I'm going to use it for food at some point. So we see, since he has the right to keep money for his food, he should have the right to keep a little bit more. So the Gemara says, no, he doesn't. He has to give anything he doesn't need for food, he has to return. He has to give to the owner. So then the Gemara brings the Gemara then asks, so what does that have to do with being Ari Miklat? If you're telling me that this is the halacha, that the master could always say this to an Eved, so why does this brayso discuss only if he's in an Ari Miklat? What does that have to do with anything? So the Gemara says, because you may have a havamina that in the year miklat you have to support him fully, and you can't say this. Because why? Because the pasuk there says v'chai. It says lana sham kol retzechas re'ebel v'das v'lo yidasem mitol shloshem v'nas achas manar ma'ela v'chai. So he's being sent there in order to live. So you may think that there's a gzeres akasav that you have to support him there and give him extra support. So the chiddush is that even in our miklat v'chai doesn't mean you have to do that. Now the Gemara says not so fast. Hold on a second. If you look further in this same Mishnah, it says that if somebody's wife goes to Ir Miklat, he is chayav to support her. So, why would he be chayav to support her if we're talking about a situation where he said, support yourself and keep your own earnings for yourself? Obviously, he didn't say that. We're talking about where he didn't say, keep your own earnings. Well, if he didn't say to her, keep your own earnings, the parallel case which we're discussing, the Eved, must be where he also didn't say, keep your own earnings. How could you tell me that he did say, keep your own earnings? So the Gemara says, no. In both cases, we're talking about where he said, keep your own earnings. He said to the Eved, keep your own earnings. He said to the Isha, keep your own earnings. However, the woman's earnings are not enough to feed her. The Eved's earnings are enough to feed him. And like we said before, that is possible with a woman, but it's not possible for a Eved to not be earning enough to feed him. So the Gemara says, hold on, we go a little bit further in the Mishnah. It says that if he did say to her, keep your own earnings, then this is different halacha. So again, clearly, up to this point, we're not talking about where he said, keep your own earnings. So Gemara says, no. All along in the entire Mishnah, he said, keep your own earnings. The last line is referring to where she earns enough, and then he tells her keep her own earnings. So up to now we're talking about where she doesn't earn enough, and then later we're talking about where she does earn enough. Someone says if she earns enough, what's the chiddush that he has the right to tell her keep her own earnings? So it says because she's now in a strange city. She doesn't know anybody there. She has to go out and find a job. So you may think it is the honor befitting of bas melech, of a princess, to remain inward, to remain in the house. You shouldn't have to go and just out in a strange city looking for work. The chiddush is that no, she still has to do that. Gemara now wants to bring a proof that this question is actually machlokes tanaim. It's machlokes tanaim whether or not the master could force the Eved to support himself, even if he's not allowing him to work for his own money. So Gemara goes to machlokes between Rab Shimon ben Gamliel and the Chachamim. The discussion over there is in a famine year, where it's very hard to buy food. Food is very expensive. So what can the Eved say to the master? Can he force the master to do something, or is the master in control? So according to Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, the Eved could say, look, either you feed me or set me free. The Chachamim say, no, it's up to the master. He can decide what he wants to do. Feed him, set him free, do nothing. It's up to him. So you see the same thing? It's exactly this machlokes. Is the master allowed to force the Eved to go collect? Or does he have to allow him to work for his own food if he doesn't intend to feed him? So the Gemara says there's two problems with the comparison here. Problem number one is our discussion is, does he have to give him his earnings to support himself? And here it doesn't say that. Here he's saying he can force him to set him free. There should be no, if you want to say that Shimon ben Gamliel holds that he could force him to get his earnings, he could say either feed me or give me my earnings. There should be no tzad that he could force him to set him free. What does that have to do with anything? The second problem is here we're talking about in a famine year. We're discussing every year. If our discussion is what they're arguing about here, why are they talking about a famine year? So what must be the pshat? So the pshat must be that we're talking about normally this Eved is able to support himself. And the master said, support yourself. Earn your own money. Take your earnings. Support yourself. The problem here is that it's a famine year and the price of food is very expensive, and his earnings are no longer enough for him to be able to eat. So there you have a problem. Should he set him free? So this is not a classic Eved where you don't hold on to him if he can't earn enough to feed himself. Here it's a temporary situation. So what do you do? So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says he could say, the Eved has a right to say either feed me or set me free, because like this I can't eat. What am I supposed to do? If you set me free, then at least I'll be able to beg, and people will have mercy on me and give me. But as long as I'm an Eved, no one's going to have mercy on me. They're assuming you're feeding me. The Rabbanan say no, he doesn't have a right to go free because of that. He could still beg. People will be willing to give him just as much rachmanas on him, whether he's an Eved or he's not an Eved. Gemara now brings another proof, this time from a statement of Rav. Rav says somebody has makdish the hands of his eved. That means that the hands of the eved now belong to Hektish, and any work that he produces, any money that he earns, is going to belong to Hektish as well. The Gemara is going to say only for a minimum size of worth a pruta. Anything less than a pruta is not Hektish yet. So anyway, so this halacha that if the this Eved, who all his work belongs to Hektish, so how's he supposed to eat? So Rav says he should borrow money, use it to buy food, eat that, then work and pay off the money that he owes. And Gemara explains later, he can't just work and use the money to eat, because every pruta that he earns belongs to Hektish. Less than pruta is not worth anything for him to buy food. What he could do is borrow, eat, and then work, and let less than pruta at a time, pay it all back in increments of less than a pruta at a time, where Hektish is not chal on it. So, anyway, the situation over here obviously is as follows. The work obviously belongs to the master, because the master is makdish it. So he's not giving the Eved his work. At the same time, he has to, the Eved has to find his own food, because the master is not feeding him. So you see that the master could keep the work and not feed him. So the Gemara says, no, here we're talking about where he is feeding him. Because if he's feeding him, why does he have to borrow money to eat? Because he needs more than he's feeding him. He wants extra food. So the Gemara says, why is Hektish responsible for the extra food? Why does he have a right to ask for extra food and use the money? So the Gemara says, no, Hektish itself wants him to have extra food. If he prefers to have extra food, Hektish wants him to be healthy, and therefore Hektish supports his wanting to have extra food. And I'm going to prove to you that we're talking about where he wants extra food, because there's another statement of Rav. I'm going to prove to you we're talking about where the master is feeding him. There's another statement of Rav, where Rav says that the Hektish is not chal. The Eved is allowed to work and eat, and the Hektish is not chal. And the reason is because if he's not going to feed himself, who's going to feed him? He's not going to have what to eat. So now how do you understand these two contradictory statements of Rav? In our previous version, he said Hektish is chal, and now he's saying Hektish is not chal. The only way to learn it is that previously we were referring to where he is being fed, and therefore Hektish could be chal, and here we're talking about where he's not being fed. But if previously we were talking about where he's not being fed, and Hektish is still chal, so what would be the situation in which Hektish is not chal? Why should that be? If the Hektish is chal even if he's not being fed, so there wouldn't be any answer for that. And therefore we've proven the previous case must be referring to where he's being fed. Gemara now brings a proof from a statement of Rav Yechanan. This is going to be a final proof we're not going to reject. The case here is where somebody cuts off, he injures someone else's Eved. He injures the Eved so that he loses a hand. So he has to pay the 5 things, Nazagri, Boishav, Sar, and Boishes. But who does he pay it to? So this statement of Rav Yechanan is that some of it gets paid to the master, not to the Eved, but to the master. What is that? So his loss of work, he can't work, he gives to the master. And the doctor bills he gives to the master as well. And then Rav Yechanan continued and said that the Eved takes food from charity. So Gemara says, hold on a second. If he's giving the loss of work to the master, obviously the master is not allowing the Eved to feed himself. He's keeping the food, he's keeping the earnings for himself. That's why the lost earnings from the injury go to him. At the same time, though, it says that the Eved is fed from tzedakah, so obviously the master is not giving him food. So you see, it's possible to keep the earnings and not give him food. So the Gemara says, then why does it, if he's being, so the Gemara answers, no, we're referring to where he is being fed. The Gemara says, if he's being fed, why does he get food from tzedakah? It's talking about extra, he wants more than is being fed. So then you shouldn't use the word that's used. The word that's used is nizain. Nizain means he gets nutrition. That's the word you use for the basics. If you're talking about extra, you should say misparnes. So obviously then we go back to our original proof. We are talking about the basic nutrition. He is taken from tzedakah, even though the master is keeping his earnings. And our proof is good, that the master is allowed to do that. Gemara now analyzes the statement of Rav Yechanan itself. We said that the medical bills are paid to the master. And what does that mean? The Gemara says the medical bills should be paid to the Eved. He has to take them to the doctor. He has to pay the doctor. And what does that have to do with being, why should it be paid to the master? So the Gemara says We're talking about where he sped up his recovery process, and uh, he had to sacrifice his comfort for that. So, for example, if he was supposed to heal within 5 days, but he took a very bitter, hard to swallow medication, and he was able to heal within 3 days. So now the doctor bills are less. So who gets that money? So you would have thought that it goes to the Eved because he did the suffering. And he should be paid for the pain that he did to heal faster. But the answer is no, that's considered an earning, and the earning goes to the master. The Gemara has concluded this subject. The Gemara refers back to the Mishnah where we saw machlokes whether or not it is a zechus for an Eved to be freed and for a woman to be divorced, or is it a chayv? So Rabbi Meir had said it's a chayv, it's not necessarily good, and therefore you can't do it without their consent. A shliach cannot do it without their consent. So the Gemara quotes it back and forth between Rabbi Lazar, representing the Chachamim, and Rabbi Meir, and the Gemara explains it. So the Gemara says in this brisa, Rabbi Eliezer says, we said to Rabbi Meir, it's a schos, he wants to be set free. So Rabbi Meir responded, it's a chayv, because if his master was a kohen, as long as he's an Eved, he could eat truma. Once he set him free, he can't eat truma any longer. The Gemara will discuss what if he was not an Eved of a kohen. But Rabbi Elazar responded, and he said, we said to him that the master could always pull out and say that I'm not feeding you any longer. So he responded, and he said, if he was an Eved of a kohen and he ran away, or the wife of a kohen that rebelled, they would still eat truma. But this guy can't eat truma any longer. The Gemara explains, what did he mean? They were saying, well, since he has a right to stop feeding him, so it's not a chayiv that he loses food, because the master could just say, I'm not feeding you, and he loses the food anyway. It's not like he owns the food. And that, Rabbi Meir said, that's true for regular food. But what about truma? Truma, he could eat truma wherever he is. As long as he's the Eved of a kohen, or the wife of a kohen, they could eat truma wherever they are. Once you set them free, you divorce them, they can't eat truma, even if they're on their own. They don't have to get it from the master. They could get truma from somewhere else. And once you set them free, they can't, so they lose that, and therefore it's not a pure zechus, and they may not want to. Says Rabbi Meir further, maybe you'll tell me that no, because the master could still do it if he wants. He could force them to get set freed or divorced. He could just throw the get shechor or the get at them. And on that we say no, but he could run away until you go and makabel the get for him or her. They could run away, and then the master, the husband, won't be able to give them the get. By you accepting, you're hurting them. So the Gemara says that's a good taina. What's the answer? Well, the Chachamim respond to that. The Gemara said that they would respond what we said in the Mishnah, that he has another way to stop them from keeping truma, and that's he could just sell them, even if they ran away somewhere. The Eved, at least, he could sell the Eved, take money from him, then he transfers property, and if he sells them to Yisrael, he loses the right to eat truma even though he ran away. So it's not a right that he has control of or that he could keep. Now, the Gemara says this is good for an Eved of a kohen that he loses truma, but what's Rabbi Meir going to say for an Eved of Yisrael? The Gemara says because it's still considered to be not necessarily good for him because he loses the right to marry a shevcha. An Eved is allowed to marry a shevcha, and once he's freed, he can't. The Gemara says, well, that's because now he can marry a bas chayrin. So why is that bad that he can't marry a shevcha anymore? It's good because now he can marry a bas chayrin. So the Gemara says, no, an Eved always prefers hefkeris, and he